Got local and far, man. I got y'all from other countries and local. How about that? It's cool. I got my my AARP calculator. I relabeled it so in case y'all wonder what it was. We'll talk about the difference between an engine-driven clutch, a wheel-driven clutch, primary ratios, and what to do with all that info. A lot of folks that are into drag racing have a lot of questions about how this stuff works. So I have a clear understanding in my mind of how it works, but the challenge is going to be how to translate that into information you can use based on my opinion. So as always, I'm going to give you this before and after. My standard operating disclaimer is these are my opinions, and somebody out there watching is way smarter than me, even on the subject here. So I'm cool with that. If you watching and you know more than I do, please understand that this is my opinion, okay? Not the gospel, or not the only way this can be interpreted. And also I know it sounds a little bit, gets old and tired hearing me say this, but look, I'm not trying to shove this down anybody's throat. This is the only way this works. This is an opinion, and of course I have 40 years of drag racing, and all of these cool trophies all had a clutch hooked to that Wally. A lot of cool trophies, even the ones back there in that room and ones over here in this room. So yes, I'm very blessed with lots of opportunities to learn this. But like I said, man, this is just a good general reason why we have such issues with it. Now, the engine-driven clutch is like you would have on a car or a truck, where the clutch is actually bolted to the flywheel, which the flywheel is bolted to the engine. I'm going to show you, like right here. This is the crankshaft flange coming out of the back of a V8, and I got a flywheel with the let me try and move this a little bit so I can see what I'm pointing at. It's got the starter ring teeth on the flywheel, and then these little black pucks here, those are the friction disc of the clutch plate that is floating on this input shaft. This is an input shaft right here. And what's really cool about the way this works is this input shaft has to pilot into the crankshaft. So there's a roller bearing here, or a bronze bushing in the crankshaft right here, that this transmission shaft actually goes right through this clutch, goes through the, I guess that's the pressure plate, goes through and misses the clutch disc. It goes through the flywheel and actually centers itself. So when this is in neutral, and all this is sitting still or in gear, and you've got the clutch disengaged, this flywheel is always bolted 1-to-1 to the crankshaft. So the flywheel always spins at crank speed. Only when you clamp the pressure plate and the flywheel together, do the disc turn, and the disc is this clutch disc right here, this is the friction disc. This disc is the only thing that touches the transmission. And when you let go of the clutch pedal or the clutch lever, and the pressure plate squeezes down on the disc, and it speeds it up to this speed. So when you're sitting at the traffic light and you got the clutch pedal in on your truck and you're going whoop, 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 revving it up to 3,000 RPM, the transmission is sitting still, the rear wheels are still, and this pressure plate is sitting in here rotating on it. So I am, when they squeeze together, of course, the disc spins. This is basic knowledge, okay? This doesn't have much to do with what we're talking about today with ratios and stuff, but that is an engine-driven clutch. Doesn't have anything to do with the rear wheel speed. It is all driven off the engine. So when you let go of the clutch pedal and you're idling and you floor the throttle, your transmission spins as fast as the input shaft spins as fast as the crankshaft. So we have different transmission ratios so that we can let the rear tires, so you can keep the engine in its power range. Now I'll talk about that in a minute, and I'm going to draw a little example here. Like first gear, you rev it up, then you shift, and second gear you rev it up, then you shift, and third gear you rev it up and you shift, fourth gear you rev it up. So that's how the RPM would look based on rear wheel would spin up at a constant rate as you increase these ratios. I'm not going to goof you up with that right now. That's another little piece in a minute. Okay, now, when you have a wheel-driven clutch, that means that it's backwards. That means that the pressure plate is bolted to the input shaft, and of course the disc is still free-floating, and the engine can rev without the transmission revving. Now, I drew it best I could to draw this. I'm not going to say it's the best in the world, but it's a pretty good old drawing, and I'm hoping you can make sense out of this. But this is the crankshaft on a motorcycle engine, Suzuki, Harley, whatever. This particular one's a Harley because it has a chain. This is the starter ring on the clutch basket like you have on all your Harleys. And the chain goes around the crankshaft, goes around the clutch basket. Now, it can be a belt drive. And on our Pro Stock Harleys, we actually don't even use that. We use a gear where this gear is big enough to mesh with this gear. And they run, and they're always connected. But the ratio, this primary ratio, is over here. I wrote down some ratios. These are just typical, 135, 155, 180, and 215. And I'll break them down for you in a minute so you can see. Is everybody doing okay with this so far? I know it's confusing, but we'll get to it. All right, on an engine-driven clutch on your motorcycle, this starter ring is spinning at some speed dictated by this primary ratio, this small crankshaft pulley versus this big clutch pulley. On a stock Harley, it's between 1.35 and 1.36 ratio. So that means that the clutch basket is going slower by 1.35 than the crankshaft is. So when this crankshaft is turning 7,000 RPM, this clutch basket is only turning, blow your mind, crankshaft's going 7,000 RPM with a 1.35 ratio. The clutch basket's only going 5180. With a 155 ratio, which a lot of Harley guys do because they put a smaller motor pulley here and they think that's going to make them dig out harder, so it changes this ratio from 135 to 155. It slows the clutch down so much from 5180 to 4516. That makes the clutch really, really hard to work. On a Kawasaki or Suzuki, Z1s and GSs, it's near 180, 1.80. So at 7,000 RPM, the clutch is only turning 3,800. So 99% of the people we talk to think that a Suzuki has a higher clutch speed than a Harley. Where at the same RPM, you can see that 3,800 versus 5,100 from a stock Suzuki to a stock Harley. Now, on a Pro Stock Suzuki or a racing Suzuki, we changed those crank ratios. We changed the ratios here on the clutch and the crank to get to a 2.15. The reason we do that is so we can make the clutch slip more. In drag racing, we want clutch slip, but we want controlled clutch slip. So at 7,000 RPM with the Pro Stock Racing Suzuki transmission ratio, primary ratio, we're running a 3,255 RPM on the clutch basket itself. So you can see the Suzuki clutch is running way slower than the Harley clutch. Now, if you were to turn this up to 14,000 RPM, this would double. It would get up to 6,200, 6,400. It would double. So what you have to do is you have to realize that a Harley is going to operate at the drag strip. You're going to turn it 5,000 to 7,000, 5,000 to 8,000 on a really fast one, okay? So you're going to be running 4,500 to 5,000 clutch speed. On a Suzuki race engine, you're still going to be running very similar speeds, even though you're turning the engine up 12, 13, 14,000 RPM. They run very similar. And the reason why this is something we know for sure from experience is when we changed over from the Suzuki Pro Stock engine back in 2002, we switched over to the SNS 160 actually 2004 is the first year we came out with the SNS 160 Pro Stock engine. We used a 135 ratio from a gear on the crank to a gear on the clutch basket, and we were able to run very similar clutch speeds as the Suzuki. So when I went to SNS in the year 2000, we were Team Winston. We were winning a championship, and in my suitcase, I brought the Suzuki clutch with me, and I said, this right here is number one qualifier clutch. I said, what we should endeavor here at SNS is we should try and duplicate this combination where we can run similar power through the similar clutch. So everybody in the world won't have to relearn this thing. So it wasn't for the Harley guys changing over to go finally NHRA racing. It was for the Suzuki guys to transfer over from going from a Suzuki to a Suzuki. So the transmission's very similar. From a Suzuki to a SNS powered Buell, sorry. So the transmission is very similar in how it works, still uses all the same shifting pieces and same style shift forks and drums. A lot of the clearances are the same between the SNS Buell and the Pro Stock Suzuki. Also the clutch plates, we use the same clutch plates, the same clutch basket. We use the same lockups. We use engine driven clutch, rear wheel clutch, wheel driven clutches. Use the same parts from the SNS 160 cubic inch V-twin all the way over to the Suzuki 4-cylinders. All right, now let's go over how you, with a Harley, for instance, how would you have an engine-driven clutch or a Suzuki? You would bolt the pressure plate to the outer basket, so that when this spins 5,000 RPM, the basket spins 5,000 RPM, and the pressure plate spins 5,000 RPM. I mean, not the pressure plate, the lockup plate. So the lockup goes the same speed as the clutch basket, and you have to have centrifugal weights that will sling out and press the clutch basket, the pressure plate, onto the clutch plates. And I got one out here to show you how it works. A engine-driven one looks like this. Okay? When these weights sling out at RPM, it pushes this pressure plate in, and it clamps down onto the clutch plates. You see these bolts around this around this clutch basket? This is where the lockup hat bolts on to the clutch, to the outer basket, okay? Now, on the regular Harley, like most of us have, and the regular Suzukis and Kawasaki's and racing engines and street engines we run, we never run anything bolted to the clutch basket. We run a lockup device bolted to the inner hub. Now, this works a little different because, I hope you can see this okay, put weights on it. And the engine revs up, even though the input shaft, I'm going to black it in a little bit so we can make sense here. Y'all excuse me for jumping around because I'm sitting on the floor. All right, here's the input shaft. It goes through here, and it splines to the inner hub. So the inner hub runs the same speed as the input shaft. All right? So now, when you take off and you let go of the clutch lever on your Harley or your Suzuki or your motorcycle, any kind of motorcycle, you let go of the lever, okay? Nothing happens. The clutch slips. The engine revs up and the clutch slips until the rear wheel turns. When the transmission rotates, then the lockup comes in and drags the engine down and speeds the wheel up. So that's why it's called a wheel-driven clutch. The engine-driven clutch is backwards. The lockup, the hat, has weights that run off of the engine speed. And when they sling out, they make the clutch plates speed up the inside hub, which makes the back tire turn. Very complicated, but that's what the difference between engine-driven and wheel-driven. Okay, now I'm going to move you over and let you see what some of these parts look like. Over here, this is a engine-driven clutch lockup. It bolts to the outside of the basket. All right, these are a couple really cool pieces. If you have 3 clutch springs, like on some CVOs on your Harleys, and you also have a Milwaukee 8, you get this kind of lockup. All right. These weights, and you see how these fingers, watch this, how these fingers come out. So when the centrifugal force slings these weights out, this presses on the pressure plate, which tightens your clutch up. All right. Now, the diaphragm spring kind, or the one with 6 springs, these are the little weights. Somebody asked me today, so what are all them batteries on there? These are tungsten weights. And the way they work is they sling out. They're very heavy. And they push down on the pressure plate right here so that it squeezes the clutch plates together and makes the back tire turn. This is a Suzuki basket or an SNS Pro Stock Buell basket. And this is what the Suzuki plates look like, and the steels and fibers. So that's the same thing we run in the Pro Stock 4-cylinder and 2-cylinder. Okay. Clutch slip. I said a minute ago, I said drag racers, we all need clutch slip. And I got to tell you why. Your engine has a power band. It's about 3,000 RPM wide. Some engines are narrower, some engines are wider torque curves. But if you have a typical engine where you have about a 3,000 RPM power band, you have to keep the engine in that RPM band in order for peak performance. So I drew these black lines, which is the engine RPM. And if you had no clutch slip, the engine would pull down. This would be too many RPM fall from here to here. Can you see this okay? From here to here is too big a fall. That's why we like lots of transmission ratios. Pro Stock cars are limited to 5 ratios. Pro Stock motorcycles are limited to 6 ratios. If we could, we would run a lot. And if you go look at new cars now, what's really neat is the new Corvettes and the new blown Camaros and some of even the Cadillacs. They've got 8-speed transmissions. They have 10-speed transmissions. And what they're doing with that is they're trying to keep the engine on peak power the most amount of time. In other words, every time you over rev past peak, you're wasting time. Every time you under rev before peak, you're wasting time. So I remember when I was growing up, I think we had a 10-speed bicycle, and all the cool kids in the neighborhood, we had one gear on our Schwinn Stingrays. We had one gear, and it was just for digging out. I mean, you could almost spin the back tire when you take off hard with your bicycle, but here comes some cool kid. He could go 10 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour, and he had a 10-speed. And of course, that was just running one-person power, and he had to get going. You couldn't even take off in 8th or 7th or 10th gear. You'd have to take off in a real low gear to get going, and then you'd shift it up. So this graph I drew right here is the engine RPM, rear wheel RPM, and then the ratio. I'm going to make this work in a minute, y'all. I got to keep remembering to look at the screen on the camera, on the phone, see if y'all can see what I'm seeing. This is an engine to tire ratio right here, or clutch chart. So starting line RPM, revving it up 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, whatever. And then when you take off, you turn it up to the shift point, and then when you shift, it falls back way below torque peak or power peak. Rev it up to shift point, and then when you shift, it falls way back below power peak. Rev it up past power peak, shift, and it falls back again. So we have to have lots of gears. I mean, a lot of you guys have watched my videos of me riding Bagzilla, and I run 5 gears through the quarter mile with it. And Pro Stock cars, we watch a lot of really nice footage that show on TV with the 5 speeds with the guys shifting inside the cars. And look how long and how short the gears are. Like the first gear is like a second. And I see on Jaggy and Erica's car with some in-car camera stuff, they even have like 7/10 of a second in second gear. It's almost as fast as they can shift a second, they have to go to third. But it's to keep it on the power band. Now, if you didn't have clutch slip, you would spin on every shift. Or if the engine was weak, like stock, it would lay down and die every shift because it didn't have enough power. So this is what the rear wheel would do. This is the back tire spinning on the shift. 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4. The back tire spins on the shifts when the clutch is just right. And then down here at the bottom, I put the ratio between the engine RPM and the rear wheel speed, and it gives me like a little graph so we can see a little bit what that clutch chart would look like. At the starting line, it slips here. On the shift, the combination of the clutch slipping and the tire slipping. So if I move the camera up here, you can see this area that I drew in. This is used up. This area is used up with tire slip and clutch slip. And if you pay real close attention, you can see that now the power band, we have narrowed it up. We are only operating in here. And when you use a centrifugal lockup like this, these are RPM sensitive. So when you get low RPM, these relax and let the clutch slip. When you get low RPM, these relax and lets the clutch slip. That's what's neat about it. Torque converters do the same thing. Torque converters slip when there's no power applied, or when it's real low RPM. It's RPM dependent as well, and power dependent. And that's another whole big mouthful. But what my point here is if we have on a really fast machine, if we were wanting to go the best ET we could, we would want to go over our power peak and then come just under. Go just over, then come just under. Just go just over and come just under. So if the transmission was perfect, it would have 10 speeds, and it would have very narrow gaps, and we'd be able to stay in the power band. But they won't let us. There's no room for a 10-speed. Lots of cool machines have 10 speeds, 8 speeds. The new Mustangs and Camaros and even pickup trucks now are doing 8 speeds and 10 speeds. And if you get in one and rent a Mustang with a 10-speed, floor it. Doesn't have much power, but man, it stays on the cam. It's like, and it stays right on the cam the whole time. And it really adds a lot of, it accelerates really fast because you're not going over and under, over and under. So, hey, when I first got my license, my daddy had a 64 Impala station wagon. It had a 327 in it, and it had a Power Glide. It had like a 180 low gear and a 1-to-1 high gear. And it had hydraulic. It was a stock 327. It must have had 150, 200 horsepower, but you could hold it in low gear. You could hold that thing down in L and floor it, and it would go 100 miles an hour in first gear. It would take, a mile or a couple minutes, but it would go 100 miles an hour in first gear. So, boy, what a waste of energy and time. Nowadays, you can take that same amount of power and outrun that car by 30 car lengths now by keeping it on the pipe, keeping it on the cam through 10 gears instead of just 1 gear. So that's really, really interesting. Now, these lockups also, if you're slipping too much, remember on the wheel-driven lockup, this is the key to you clutch guys. The wheel-driven clutches are dictated by speed. So you got to get going fast for the input shaft to be going fast enough to sling these weights out. You see how that is moving? Okay. On the engine-driven clutch, like this, all you got to do is rev it up. As soon as the RPM goes up, engine RPM goes up, the clutch locks up. As soon as the engine RPM goes down, the clutch slips. So this is engine controlled, engine speed controlled. This one is rear wheel controlled speed. Which one's better? Woo! Man, right now on Pro Stock Motorcycle, there are two kinds going fast. There's an engine-driven clutch going fast in Pro Stock Motorcycle, and there's a wheel-driven clutch going fast in Pro Stock Motorcycle. We were developing and working on those. There's lots of them. MTC has this really cool Gen 2 that's gotten pretty popular. Then there's versions of it that guys are selling with more adjustability. One thing that's really neat, in my opinion, about this engine-driven clutch, it's got these springs and these little cups where these fingers are T-shaped. They push on the lockup, on the pressure plate here, this weight slings out, and then on the other end of this finger, I'll draw a little picture of it so you can see what it looks like. It's pretty neat how it works. Let's get the challenge. The weight goes here, this part pushes on the pressure plate, and this part, when it pivots, this goes down, when this goes out, this goes up, and when this goes up, it pushes this spring-loaded bucket. There's a bucket in here with a spring under it, and it resists this. It resists this movement. So you can adjust the spring pressure, you can add weight, and you can also change these lever ratios, but it's all adjustable, and sometimes it's too adjustable. These guys right here are also adjustable. Now, one thing that I want to say, because I'm running out of time fast, but the guys with the Harleys, you have a 12-second bike or a 13-second bike, and you broke the rear belt, and you broke the transmission, and you broke the compensator, or you broke the clutch basket. I'm going to say that you got one of these fully loaded when you don't need it, or you got one of these fully loaded when you don't need it, and when you rev that engine up to shift point, and you disengage the clutch at full throttle where it's going, you have your hand on the clutch and you go to 6,000 or 7,000 RPM right here, and it's already up to the rev limiter, and you have the throttle pinned, and you pull the clutch in, the engine goes straight up. And when it does, you shift to the next gear, and then you throw all this weight. All this weight is already up there because you're going fast. Rear wheel weight. It's got this speed up, and this thing is going fast. And when you let that clutch back out, it will snap the belt, it will blow the tranny apart, it will blow the clutch basket apart, and you don't even need that much pressure. It takes a really powerful engine to slip a stock clutch with one of these. Even on Bagzilla with 200 horsepower, and it goes in the nines, like 940s or 930s, I didn't even have a lockup on it. I had just springs. And we kept in the power band with the clutch slipping. Like if you ever listen to my videos, you can hear it would go, it would slide through here. And I wanted some slip. So instead of buying a new compensator or a new primary chain or a new clutch basket or new transmission gears or a new belt or a new rear chain and all the things that break, I would put new clutch plates in it every now and then. It would burn up 1 or 2 every race, but clutch plates are cheap, they're easy. You should be doing maintenance on those. You should watch that, and you should see, if you ever data trace your motorcycle going down the track, you need to see some slants on the front side of these, back side of these, where you're sliding, where it's revving up and sliding in the second, revving up, sliding in the third, revving up, slide. And I don't know what it is, but somehow or another, we have convinced people that if your clutch slips, something's wrong with it, and we need to fix it. Now, if your clutch is slipping and you need 10% more pressure, there's several ways to do that. But why do people that have a slipping clutch and it needs a 10% increase in clamping would put one of these on where it triples the clamping? And now you have taken a clutch that's almost slipping and you put this on it? It's too much, y'all. You need to take over half of this stuff off of here. And let's just say that these right here, we don't run these right out of the box because this right here can tear up anything. I can't make a clutch slip on a 9-second bike with 200 horsepower on one of these. Why do you need it on a 100 horsepower street bike? Clutch is slipping. It's slipping because of the way you're shifting it. Think about it. When you take off from the line with a 900 or 1,000-pound motorcycle, and you take off from a street light or stop sign, and you ease the clutch out, now the clutch is locked. And you floor it. Then you shift by using the clutch. Shift. You're disengaging every time, disengaging every time, disengaging every time. And it can't come back. It can't catch up. It gets hot, and then it gets behind. When I'm racing, I let go of the clutch at the starting line, and I never disengage the clutch again. I never disengage the clutch again. You have to have a power interrupter, guys. What is that? That is, that's a power interrupter. Or you kill the ignition wire with a micro switch to blip the ignition long enough for it to get in the next gear, or you interrupt the signal to the fuel injection where it cuts off the fuel just for a moment to shift. That's another day we'll talk about. Looks like I'm running out of time already, and I've used, this thing went by so fast. Thank you guys for watching, and we have a lot of cool stuff to share. Man, this just opens up doors of things I wanted to share with you guys. And please remember, this is not the gospel. This is only an opinion. Got a lot of data here, and I'm sure since I'm doing it live, look y'all, live. This is not recorded. I'm running off the cuff. I wrote down a couple notes that I'm going off of, but I have talked fast because I wanted to get a lot through here, and I may have missed something I said, or I may have given you some bad info, but please take this as an opinion. Email me, Facebook me, message me. I'm on Instagram as well. I would love to know what you're thinking. I'd love to know what questions you have, and I would love for you guys to tell me what you're thinking about it. And I'm only sharing what I think I know, okay? Hey, quote me on that. I am sharing what I think I know. And yeah, it's easy to say, yeah, you know a lot. But look, if you worked on this every day for 40 years, 7 days a week, and all you did was think about how to go fast and think about how to win these, if this was your day job instead of clocking in where you clock or what you work on, which God bless you, we need everybody, restaurants and service individuals and even the people that work in insurance companies and everywhere that don't have any ability to do this testing. We are so thankful for you guys. And I'm sitting on the floor with my shoes off, Indian style on the floor, and I get to work on this stuff every day, and I'm thankful for it, and I wanted to share it. God bless y'all. Look out for each other.